The restaurant hummed with its usual evening energy. Soft light from crystal chandeliers reflected off polished glasses and silverware. The air smelled of roasting meat, expensive wine, and fresh flowers. Men in crisp suits leaned in for quiet conversations. Women laughed behind their hands. Everyone looked comfortable, polished, and sure of where they belonged. Moving through this scene was a young woman in a simple black dress and a neat apron. She was like a shadow, present but hardly noticed. Her name was Elena. To the people at the tables, she was just the person who brought their food. She had a good memory. She never forgot who ordered the steak rare or who wanted no ice in their drink. She was polite, always smiling a small, quiet smile. But her eyes, if anyone had really looked, were somewhere else. While her hands carried heavy trays, her mind was often filled with music. Not the soft jazz playing through the restaurant speakers, but different music. Big, powerful, emotional music made by pianos. For 10 long years, every single dollar she earned in places like this, every tip, every bit of overtime pay, had been saved for one thing. It went to pay for her lessons at the music conservatory across town. Her life was split in two. There was the daytime and evening life of the restaurant, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of orders, the feel of a warm plate in her hand. Then there was the other life, the life of her hands on piano keys, practicing scales and complex pieces for hours in a small, quiet room at the school or on a silent keyboard in her apartment. That keyboard didn't make a sound. She used headphones. She practiced late into the night, after her feet ached from standing all day. The tips of her fingers were not soft. They were marked by the hard work of the keys, just like they were marked by the hot water of the restaurant's sink dot in the center of the Gilded Vine restaurant. On a small stage sat the reason for this double life. A grand piano. It was beautiful, a deep, shiny black that looked like a still pool of water. It was treated with great care, polished every morning. But it was mostly silent. It was only used on Friday and Saturday nights by a rotation of performers. A man who played smooth jazz standards. A woman who sang popular songs in a gentle voice. They were part of the decoration, like the paintings on the wall. To Elena, that piano was so much more. It was a symbol of everything she was working for. A real instrument with a real rich sound. Sometimes, when she was refilling water glasses near the stage, she would let her gaze rest on it for just a second. She imagined what it would feel like to sit there, to let her hands wake that sleeping giant of wood and wire. But it was a forbidden daydream. She was staff. Her place was on the floor, not on the stage. The manager, a serious man who cared deeply about rules and order, had made that clear when she was hired. The instruments and the stage are for the performers only, he had said. We all have our roles. So she watched. She listened. She served the people who sat at the table closest to the stage, oblivious to the magic box beside them. She cleared the plates of those who talked right through the Friday night performances. The dream felt heavy sometimes, a weight in her chest. The years were passing. Her teacher at the conservatory said she had a special gift, a feeling for the music. But a gift needed an opportunity, and opportunities, in Elena's world, seemed very rare and very far away. This particular Wednesday was slow. Only about half the tables were full. The quiet jazz from the speakers felt louder without the crowd noise to soak it up. Elena moved from table to table, checking on people, offering more bread, clearing empty glasses. Her body was here, doing the job, but a part of her mind was still hearing the tricky passage from a Chopin piece she had struggled with in practice that very afternoon. She was mentally rehearsing the finger movements when the sound of loud laughter broke her. Concentration. It came from a table of 4 men in their 30s. They had the easy confidence of people who were used to being in charge. Their table was littered with the remnants of an expensive meal and a second bottle of red wine. One of them, a man with a loud, carrying voice, was holding court. He caught Elena's eye as she passed. "Hey, excuse me," he said, his tone friendly, but with an edge of mockery underneath. He pointed a thumb toward the dark, silent stage. "That thing just for looks? When does the show start?" Elena offered her professional smile. "The live pianist performs on Friday and Saturday evenings, sir." The man, who his friends called Gavin, made a disappointed face, playing it up for his audience. "Ah, come on. A place this fancy, and the piano's just furniture on a Wednesday?" He took a sip of his wine, his eyes twinkling with a mean idea. He looked right at Elena. "You know how to play? I'll make it worth your while." He pulled a $50 bill from his wallet and waved it lightly. $50 if you can play us a little chopsticks." "What do you say?" His friends chuckled, leaning back in their chairs to watch the show. A few people at nearby tables glanced over, sensing a disturbance. Elena felt her face grow warm. The manager, from his post near the host stand, was watching carefully, his expression tense. This was exactly the kind of scene he hated. The old Elena, the one who just kept her head down, would have laughed it off politely and walked away. But something snapped. Maybe it was the long years of being unseen. Maybe it was the weight of the dream pressing down on her in that moment, right next to the instrument that represented it. The $50 bill felt like an insult to every sacrifice she had ever made. The laughter felt like it wasn't just at her, but at the very idea of her dream. She looked at the laughing man, then at the beautiful, silent piano. She thought of the thousands of hours of practice, the silent keyboard in her apartment, the aching hope. A strange calm settled over her. The nervous heat left her face. She looked directly at Gavin, and her voice, when it came out, was clear and steady, not loud, but carrying in the quiet room. "Actually," she said, a new firmness in her tone, "I will play." She didn't wait for his reaction. She untied her apron strings, folded the black cloth neatly, and placed it on an empty service stand. Then, as every eye in the restaurant followed her, she walked calmly toward the stage, toward the grand piano. It was no longer just a piece of furniture. The air in the restaurant seemed to freeze for a second. You could hear the clink of a single fork being set down, the distant hiss from the coffee machine in the bar. All eyes were glued to the young woman in the simple black dress as she walked away, from the safety of the tables and toward the small, elevated stage. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild drumbeat of fear and adrenaline. But on the outside, she moved with a calm she did not feel. The manager, a man named Robert, who valued order above all else, took a quick step forward from his station, his face pale. "Elena," he said in a sharp, low whisper meant only for her. "What are you doing? Get back to the floor, now." His eyes were wide with a warning. She paused, just for a moment, and met his gaze. She didn't say a word, but something in her look, a determination he had never seen in his quiet, efficient waitress, made him stop. He didn't grab her arm. He just stood there, frozen in conflict, watching as she stepped up onto the dark wood of the stage. From their table, the loud man Gavin let out a hearty, approving laugh. "All right, now we're getting a show." He nudged his friend, clearly enjoying the drama he had created. He leaned back, folding his arms, ready to be entertained by a fumbling version of a child's tune. He still held the $50 bill loosely between his fingers. Elena reached the piano. It looked bigger up close, more imposing. The polished black lid reflected the dim ceiling lights, like a starless night sky. She gently lifted the heavy fallboard, revealing the neat row of ivory and ebony keys. They seemed to wait for her, silent and expectant. She sat on the polished leather bench, adjusting it slightly. The familiar feel of a piano bench beneath her, the specific distance from the keys, was a small comfort in this sea of staring faces. She placed her hands in her lap for a moment, taking a deep, quiet breath. She could smell the faint, familiar sense of old wood, felt, and dust. This was a real instrument. This was what all the silent practice had been for Dot in the audience. People were shifting in their seats. A few exchanged amused glances. An older couple near the front looked concerned, as if worried for her embarrassment. One of the other waiters, a young man named Leo, who sometimes shared a shift with her, had stopped completely, a tray of dirty dishes balanced in his hands. His mouth slightly open. Elena shut out their faces. She closed her eyes. The noise of the restaurant faded away. In her mind, there was only the music. Not the simple, mocking tune the man asked for, but a different music. A music that was like a storm and like a story. It was a piece she had lived with for years, one that held all her own feelings of struggle, of beauty, of a sadness that yearned for something more. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1. She opened her eyes. Her posture changed. The slouch of a tired waitress disappeared. Her back straightened, her shoulders settled. She raised her hands, and for the first time, everyone could see her fingers not as tools for carrying plates, but as instruments themselves. She placed them gently on the keys. And then she began. The first notes were not loud, but they were profound. A deep, questioning chord, followed by a graceful, winding melody that floated through the silent room. It was haunting and beautiful, completely unexpected. The sound that came from the piano was rich and full, a world away from the tinny jazz from the speakers or the simple tune everyone was waiting for. Gavin's smirk vanished. His arm, which had been resting on the back of his chair, slowly came down. He stared, his wine forgotten. His friends were no longer smiling. They just watched. The music began to paint pictures. It started softly, like a lonely memory. Then it grew, becoming more urgent, more passionate. Elena's hands moved with a life of their own, dancing across the keyboard, sometimes gentle and flowing, sometimes striking with powerful, precise force. Her body moved with the emotion of the piece, leaning into the sorrowful phrases, rising with the bursts of energy. This was not someone playing notes. This was someone telling a story without words. Dot in the kitchen doorway. The head chef had appeared, wiping his hands on a towel. He stood still, listening. The busboy by the dish pit peeked out, his face curious. The older couple near the stage were holding hands. The woman had tears in her eyes. She wasn't sure why, but the music was touching something deep inside her. The manager, Robert, had not moved from his spot. His initial anger was gone, replaced by pure shock. He looked at the woman on stage, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. He listened to the complex, difficult music pouring from the instrument he only saw as a weekend decoration. His mind raced. Asterisk, she's a waitress. My waitress. How is this possible? Asterisk Elena played through the fiery, technical sections, her fingers a blur, never missing a note. She played through the tender, heartbreaking melodies. The piece built and built, a wave gathering itself. She was no longer in the restaurant. She was in the practice room. She was in her dreams. She was inside the very heart of the music. All the years of work, of quiet hope, of tired muscles and silent sacrifice, were flowing out through her fingertips. Dot, she reached the famous, furious finale. The music became a whirlwind, a cascade of notes tumbling over each other in a passionate, desperate rush. It was powerful, almost violent in its beauty. And then, with a series of crashing, definitive chords, it ended. The final note hung in the air, vibrating into a perfect, breathless silence. Elena's hands fell softly to her lap. Her shoulders dropped. She was drained, utterly spent. She slowly opened her eyes, blinking, returning to the real world. The restaurant was a photograph. No one moved. No one clapped. No one made a sound. Every single person, from the laughing man to the worried couple to the frozen staff, was simply staring, stunned, at the woman on the stage. The silence was heavier than any noise. The silence that followed the last note was absolute. It was a thick, living thing that filled the restaurant, pressing down on everyone. In that moment, there was no sound of clinking glass, no hum of the air conditioner, no whisper of conversation. It was as if the entire world had paused to listen to the echo of what had just happened. Elena sat very still on the piano bench. Her hands, which had moments before been a storm of motion, now rested quietly in her lap. She could feel the hard, smooth wood of the keys under her fingertips. She could hear the frantic, drumming beat of her own heart in her ears. The bright lights of the dining room seemed too sharp, too real. She was back. The magic bubble of the music had popped, and now she was just a waitress, sitting on a stage in front of a room, full of staring people. A cold dread began to creep into her stomach. What had she done? The man's mocking laughter was gone, but this silence felt worse. Had she offended them? Had she broken some unspoken rule so completely that they were all just shocked into stillness? She kept her eyes down, looking at the patterns of the piano keys. She couldn't bear to look up and see their faces. She imagined the manager's furious expression, the customers' annoyed glances. She had let her feelings take over, and now she would lose her job. The thought made her feel hollowed out at the table where it had all started. The man named Gavin was the first to break from the spell. His brain, slowed by good wine and total shock, was trying to catch up. He had expected clumsy notes, a few wrong keys, maybe a laugh at her effort. He had not expected that. He had never heard music like that in his life. Not live. Not from someone he had just treated like part of the furniture. The joke was on him, and the weight of it was heavy. Without thinking, moved by a feeling he couldn't quite name, respect, shame, all his hands came together. It wasn't a loud, dramatic clap. It was a single, slow, solid clap. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. Clap, then another. Clap. He stood up as he clapped. His chair scraped softly on the floor. His friends, looking from him to Elena and back again, slowly rose to their feet as well. One of them, a quieter man who had said little all evening, had tears in his eyes. He nodded, as if agreeing with something profound. That first, solitary clap was the spark. It ignited the room dot at the table by the window. The older couple stood up, their faces glowing. The woman was openly wiping her cheeks. Near the kitchen, the waiter named Leo finally remembered the heavy tray in his hands. He quickly set it down on a service stand with a thud and started clapping wildly, a huge disbelieving grin spreading across his face. The head chef, still in the doorway, gave a sharp, approving nod and joined in. His big hands making a powerful sound knot, it started in pockets, then spread like a wave. One table, then the next. People pushed their chairs back and rose to their feet. There was no reluctant, polite applause. This was a roar. It was thunderous, warm, and filled with emotion. People were not just clapping. They were cheering. Some whistled. The sound filled the space, bouncing off the high ceilings. Washing over Elena on the stage dot, she finally looked up. What she saw took her breath away more completely than the music had. The entire restaurant was standing. Every single person. The suited businessmen, the couples on dates, the staff in their uniforms, all of them were on their feet, facing her, their hands moving together in a storm of noise. Their faces were not mocking or bored. They were lit up with amazement, with joy, with the shared understanding that they had witnessed something special. Her eyes found the manager. He was not clapping. He was just standing by the host stand, staring at her. But his expression wasn't anger. It was pure, unvarnished shock. He looked as if someone had just rewritten the rules of his restaurant right in front of him. He watched the standing crowd, heard the deafening applause, and then looked back at the young woman on the stage. His waitress, the pianist. Tears, hot and sudden, welled up in Elena's eyes. She tried to blink them back, but it was useless. They blurred the cheering crowd into a shimmering mosaic of light and color. The weight of the dread melted away, replaced by a swelling feeling in her chest, so big she thought it might burst. This wasn't just applause for a song. This was a recognition. For all those years of being unseen, of being just the person who brought the food, she was finally, truly seen. She did the only thing that felt right. She stood up from the piano bench, her legs feeling a little shaky. She took one small step forward and gave a slight, humble bow of her head. The applause swelled even louder in response. As she straightened, her gaze met Gavin's across the room. He was still clapping, but his earlier arrogance was gone. His face showed a simple, direct respect. He gave her a slow, sincere nod. It wasn't an apology spoken out loud, but she felt it. The $50 bill was nowhere to be seen. The applause went on and on. It didn't want to stop. People were looking at each other, smiling, sharing the moment. The sound was a physical force, warming the room. Then, through the noise, Elena saw the manager start to move. He walked carefully between the tables, his eyes fixed on her. He stepped up onto the stage, which felt strange and formal. He stood beside her, close enough for her to hear him over the din. He leaned in. The crowd, curious, began to quiet down slightly to see what would happen. Elena braced herself. This was it. The dismissal. You're fired for causing a scene. But his words, when they came, were not what she expected. His voice was low, filled with a confusion that was almost comical. He wasn't shouting. He was asking. He looked from her face to the cheering people and back again, utterly lost. Elena, he said, his voice almost swallowed by the remaining applause. He had to raise it slightly. Why on earth are you waiting tables? The people at the nearest tables heard it. A fresh wave of laughter and cheers erupted. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. It wasn't a manager scolding an employee. It was one human being asking another a very obvious and very important question. Elena looked at him, the tears still wet on her cheeks, and for the first time that night, she smiled. A real, true, full smile that reached her eyes. She didn't have an answer. Or maybe the answer was in the smiling faces of the crowd still standing before her. In the feel of the piano keys still humming under her skin. In the sound of the applause that was finally for her. The manager's question seemed to hang in the air, mixing with the last echoes of the applause. Why on earth are you waiting tables? People were still standing, their faces turned towards the stage, waiting to see what would happen next. The moment felt suspended, like a glass bubble. Elena looked at the manager, her smile still touching her lips, but her mind suddenly blank. What could she say? That she needed the money? That dreams don't pay the rent? It all seemed too complicated to explain here, now, with everyone listening. So she just gave a small shrug, one that held years of quiet struggle. The manager, a man named Robert who had always been about schedules and side work, stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. The spell was broken by movement from the table of the loud man. Gavin. He was walking towards the stage. The crowd's attention shifted to him. Elena felt a flicker of the old anxiety. Was he coming to complain after all? To say the show was nice, but his steak was cold? He stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at her. He had left his wine glass and his friends behind. His expression was serious, no trace of the mocking laughter from before. That was. He began, then shook his head, searching for the right word. That was incredible. Truly, I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier was rude and disrespectful. He didn't make excuses. He didn't blame the wine. He just stated it plainly, looking her directly in the eyes. Then, he did something that surprised her even more than his apology. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, not for his wallet, but for a small, sleek business card holder. He took out a card. I don't know what your situation is, but talent like that shouldn't be hidden. My firm sponsors a charity arts foundation. We're always looking for real, authentic performers for our events. Would you be willing to let me put you in touch with them? Elena took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. The thick, embossed paper felt foreign in her hand, which was more used to the texture of a menu or a wet dishcloth. She just nodded, unable to form words. Thank you. She finally managed to whisper out with that. Gavin gave another respectful nod, first to her, then a general one to the watching room, and returned to his table. The conversation there was now hushed and earnest. His friends looking at him with new interest. The manager, Robert, watched this exchange, his mind visibly racing. The gears of business were turning now, cutting through his shock. He cleared his throat and addressed the room, his professional voice returning, but warmer than usual. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that wonderful moment. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. The sound of people finally settling back into their seats filled the room. It was a rustle of clothing, the scrape of chairs, the resumption of soft murmurs. But the atmosphere was utterly changed. The air felt charged, lighter. People at different tables were smiling at each other, strangers bonded by a shared secret. Robert turned to Elena. Come with me to the office for a moment, please. His tone was not unkind, but it was firm. The please was new. She followed him, feeling every eye on her back as she stepped off the stage and walked through the dining room. As she passed the waiter, Leo, he silently raised a hand for a high five. She lightly slapped it, a grin breaking through her daze. The older couple reached out and gently touched her arm. Beautiful, dear. Just beautiful, the woman said. The walk to the small, tidy office in the back felt like a long journey. The noises of the kitchen, the sizzle of pans, the shouted orders sounded distant. Robert closed the door behind them, muting the world. He didn't sit behind his desk. Instead, he leaned against it, crossing his arms. Elena, he started, then paused, rubbing his forehead. What was that? I'm sorry, she said automatically, the habit of an employee. I know I shouldn't have I broke the rule. I'll understand if you... She couldn't finish the sentence. Stop, he said, holding up a hand. Just stop apologizing. What I'm trying to ask is, how long have you been able to play like that? Since I was a child, she said quietly. I study at the conservatory. I've been working here to pay for it. He blinked, processing this. The conservatory. And you're here? He said it not as an insult, but with genuine bewilderment. You play like I've only heard on recordings. And you're refilling water glasses. She didn't know what to say to that. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at her as if for the first time. He saw the tiredness around her eyes that makeup couldn't hide, the strong but slender hands of a worker and a musician. He thought about the silent, efficient employee he knew, and the fiery, passionate artist who had just commanded his entire restaurant. The Friday pianist, he said suddenly, thinking out loud. He just called to cancel for next month. He's going on a cruise. He looked at her, a new idea forming. How would you feel about a trial? Playing here on Friday nights? Properly, as a featured performer. We'd pay the standard rate, of course. More than you make in tips on a Friday shift. I can guarantee that. Elena felt the floor shift under her feet. It was too much. The applause, the business card in her hand, and now this. A real gig. A chance to play the piano for people, not just for herself in a silent room. Her dream, which had always been a distant, fuzzy thing, was suddenly stepping into the light, clear and close. I would love that, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Good, he said, a small, almost awkward smile appearing on his usually stern face. Good. Now, for God's sake, take the rest of the night off. You've earned it. But before you go, he hesitated, seeming almost embarrassed. Would you mind playing a little something else on your way out? Not a whole piece. Just a few notes. I think the room needs it. He wasn't wrong. As Elena walked back through the dining room, now just a young woman in a black dress leaving work, a respectful quiet fell again. People watched her go, but it was a friendly, warm attention. She stopped at the piano. She didn't sit. She just lifted the lid that had been left open, and with one hand played a simple, flowing chord progression. It was a few seconds of music, sweet and hopeful. It wasn't a storm like before. It was a gentle rain after the storm, promising a clear sky. As the last note faded, she gave a final, small smile to the room and walked out the front door into the cool night air. The door swung shut behind her, but inside, the feeling she left behind lingered, settling into the very walls of the place. She was no longer just the waitress. She was the pianist who had been there all along. The cool night air outside the restaurant felt like a baptism. It washed over Elena's face, sharp and clean, carrying away the last traces of heat from the stage lights and the weight of all those staring eyes. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. The sounds of the city distant traffic, a siren, the murmur of people on the next block seemed both loud and peaceful. They were the sounds of the real world, but for the first time in a long time, she felt completely a part of it. She started walking, not really heading anywhere in particular. Her body hummed with a strange, buzzing energy. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, trembling tiredness in her muscles. But her mind was wide awake, replaying everything. The feel of the keys, the wall of sound from the applause, the manager's confused face, the solid weight of the business card in her hand. She took it out and looked at it under a street lamp. The name of the man, Gavin, was printed in sleek letters, and below it, the name of a foundation she had actually heard of. They funded music programs for kids. Her fingers traced the raised print. This was real. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Leo, the other waiter. It was just a string of wide-eyed emojis and the words, "You are a rock star." She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that stretched her cheeks. She texted back a simple, "Thank you," and put the phone away. She realized she was walking towards the conservatory. It was a habit, her feet taking her to the place that felt most like home, even at this hour. The grand old building was dark, most of its windows black. But the security guard at the side door, an older man who had seen her come and go at all hours for years, recognized her and nodded her in. The halls were silent and shadowy, lit only by emergency lights. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floor. She went to the practice wing, to the small, warm room she rented by the month. It was nothing special, just a piano, a stool, a single chair. But it was hers. She flipped on the light and sat down at the instrument. An older upright with a few chipped keys. This was where the magic was supposed to happen. This was where she wrestled with difficult passages, where she poured her frustration and her hope into the wood and wire. But tonight, sitting here felt different. The room seemed smaller, quieter. It was a cocoon, and she had just broken out of it. She didn't play. She just sat with her hands in her lap, thinking about the restaurant's grand piano. How its sound had filled the entire space. How it had felt to play for people who were listening, really listening. Not a teacher judging her technique, but human beings receiving the story she was telling. That connection, that electric thread between her hands and their hearts, was a new kind of music. It was a feeling no practice room could ever give her. The next few days were a blur of normalcy and strange newness. She went back to work for her scheduled shifts. But everything had changed. The other staff members looked at her with a new respect, a friendly awe. The cook who always called her kid now asked, "Hey, Maestro, how's it going?" With a grin. The manager, Robert, was polite, efficient, but polite. He had a contract for her to look over for the Friday night performances. The customers were the funniest part. Some who had been there that night would come in and do a double take. "It's you," they'd say, and ask for her section. They didn't ask for a song. They just wanted to be served by the pianist. One older gentleman left a tip that was 5 times his bill with a note that said, "For the music." She called the number on the business card. A friendly woman from the foundation answered. She had already heard from Gavin. He wouldn't stop talking about it. The woman laughed. They set up a meeting. It was to discuss a possible performance at a fundraising gala in a few months. It was a real opportunity with a real fee attached. The first Friday night arrived. Elena felt a nervousness that was entirely different from the defiant fear of that first time. This was a chosen nervousness, the kind that comes with a responsibility. She wore a simple black dress she'd saved for, not her waitress uniform. Robert introduced her properly. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is our pleasure to present our featured pianist for this evening." She sat at the same piano. The room was full, busier than a normal Friday. Word had gotten around. As she played her first set, a mix of classical pieces and some beautiful, thoughtful arrangements of songs people might know, she didn't get a roaring, standing ovation. She got something better, a deep, attentive silence, followed by warm, sustained applause. People leaned in. They closed their eyes. They nodded. They were there for the music. After her set, as she took a break at the bar, a young woman, maybe a college student, approached her shyly. "Excuse me," she said. I play too. Just at home. I've always been too scared to play for anyone. Watching you last week, it made me think maybe I could." Her eyes were shining with a hopeful fear that Elena recognized in her very bones. Elena reached out and touched the girl's arm. "You should," she said, her voice firm and kind. "The world needs to hear it." In that moment, she understood the full circle of what had happened. The mockery that night hadn't just been an obstacle. It had been a key, unlocking a door, not just for her, but for the music itself. It had forced the secret out into the open. Her dream was no longer a fragile, private thing she carried alone. It was a living thing, shared in a restaurant, sparking an idea in a young girl's heart, filling the space between people on a Friday night. She finished her night, packed up her music, and said good night. As she walked out, Robert stopped her. He handed her an envelope with her performance fee. "Good work," he said, and then, almost as an afterthought, "The dinner crowd has increased by 30% on Fridays. They're calling for reservations and asking if the pianist is playing." She walked home, the envelope in her bag. The dream hadn't just come true in a single spectacular moment of applause. It had woven itself into the fabric of her daily life. She was still the same person. She still had bills and doubts and a small apartment. But she was also now the pianist. The two halves of her life, the waitress and the artist, weren't at war anymore. They had finally been introduced. And standing there on that sidewalk, Under the same moon that had shone down on her for all those quiet, tired walks home, she knew the music she made would never have to be a secret again.